And so picking up where we just left off, right, and thinking about the nature of a hangover, again, the definition here is a severe headache or other after effects caused by drinking in excess of alcohol. But as we discussed, I mean, there's lots of ways of considering, the effects of drinking alcohol and the after effects of drinking alcohol and the kind of severity of hangovers, maybe a slight dull headache, maybe a pounding one, maybe other symptoms as well that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. But there is a supplemental definition here of a hangover that I think is, again, worthy of putting into the conversation, is a custom, habit, feeling that survives from the past. Okay? So most notably, when we think about a hangover, we think about it in terms of like the really terrible feeling that one has after a night of drinking. But then you take it a step further, and the second definition I think is, again, worthy of looking into, of a custom habit feeling that survives from the past. And you hear this sometimes kind of in when you think about maybe, you go to a vacation and you have a hangover from a vacation, right? You're still kind of like holding on to that feeling of what that vacation was like. Or perhaps in a relationship, right? Part of the process of a breakup might be, suffering through the hangover, right? Because maybe you're still holding on to some feeling of what that was like. And so you kind of experience that kind of hangover of ridding yourself of that feeling, right? And again, I mean, maybe there's some connection here, right? Like a night after drinking, and you're reflecting on what was done, what was said, and maybe you had a really great night. Maybe it was really fun. You connected with some really good people. The energy was great, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so not only the next day, right, where you are not feeling, maybe physiologically very well, like you do have that headache, but maybe you're also in a pretty good mood because of how good the night was before, right? So maybe that is kind of residual hangover. So I don't know. I mean, I think that there are certain ways of thinking about a hangover that can be rather interesting. Okay? I think the most interesting way of thinking about a hangover is the following, though. And this is going to connect with some of those videos from Sartre last week and some of our kind of, attempt and a focus at existentialism. And it took me kind of a little while, both personally and just kind of like, philosophically, to make some of these connections. But once I did, I think that there is something that's rather telling about what we can learn from a hangover. Okay? So, going back to like last week and going back to kind of, again, Sartre's approach as it relates to freedom and responsibility, I want to offer the following observation, the following kind of maybe anecdote. It's not an anecdote. The following observation as it relates to hangovers in maybe an existential sense. So consider this. If one of the aspects of existentialism, right, or kind of moments of existential awareness, they occur when we're kind of most profoundly aware of our existence, and those existential moments exist when we're kind of profoundly aware of the choices that we make. And it seems that hangovers are most reflective of our choices sometimes, right? Especially as it concerns to alcohol, not just like full stop categorically, but as it relates to alcohol and as it relates to kind of our way of thinking about the nature of choice and the nature of self-awareness. The day after you consume a decent amount of alcohol, right, and you're not feeling well and you're hungover, you are, in fact, profoundly aware of your existence. And you're profoundly aware of your existence and the power of the choice you had the night before. Right? And so again, this is all wrapped up with some of our conversations from last week. And this might very well influence or change the way perhaps you consider going forward in your decisions to drink alcohol, to not drink alcohol, the level of alcohol that you choose to drink, etc. Because hangovers aren't an excuse, right? Right? And this is another kind of like area of hangovers that I always find really interesting. But the idea here of thinking about, going forward as you think about the nature of consumption, the nature of your own choices to consume alcohol. And if you choose to drink alcohol, you recognize and you know the possibility of being hungover. And so taking responsibility for that choice in the very real existential sense, because I think that there is something pretty profound about the power of a hangover the next day, where you are profoundly aware of your existence. You are profoundly aware that you exist because you feel so terrible, right? And that kind of like nature of that feeling is indicative of the power of choices we have over our own lives, both in the context of drinking alcohol, but maybe extrapolating that outwardly, right? That when we think we have no choice, maybe we can point to instances, both maybe related to alcohol and not related to alcohol, but we can point to instances that showcase the power of choice that we have over our own lives. And again, being responsible for those choices that we make. And so the next day, when you're hungover and you're not feeling well, right, you are kind of sadly reminded of how much kind of choice you have and kind of the direction and perhaps kind of the infliction you have of how you feel perhaps in your own life. There's a little bit more to say here, and so that's going to be the next video, and then we'll kind of wrap it up here.